You know what's wild? The moment Caitlin Clark stepped into that NBA broadcast world, it wasn't just a guest spot. It felt like someone quietly slid a match across a table full of gasoline, and then acted shocked when people started panicking. Because here's the thing nobody says out loud. The NBA doesn't just protect players and highlights. It protects status. It protects who gets to sound smart about the game. It protects who's allowed to be treated like an authority. So when a 23-year-old WNBA superstar shows up on a primetime NBA desk on a night with millions watching, this isn't just basketball anymore. This becomes a test, not of her, but of the entire system. A test of the old voices. A test of what fans will accept. A test of whether the people who've been gatekeeping basketball commentary for decades can handle someone who doesn't fit the usual mold, walking in like she's always belonged there. Because the internet didn't react like it was a normal sports segment. It reacted like a nerve got hit. Some people acted like the league had just been exposed. Others acted like NBC had committed a crime. And the loudest critics didn't even wait to hear what she'd say. They were already angry at the idea of her being there. And that's where the real story starts, even before she speaks. See, every time a new face breaks into an old club, the first thing the club does is pretend it's not a club. They start throwing around words like experience, credentials, and paid your dues. They make it sound polite and professional, like it's about quality control. But what they are really defending is the latter. The order, the unspoken rule that you're only allowed a seat at the table if the table says so. And Caitlin Clark showing up to talk NBA hoops on a major broadcast is basically someone walking into the VIP section without asking permission. That's why the reaction got so loud, so fast. You could feel the fear underneath the opinions. Not fear like someone's in danger, but fear like someone's role is at risk. Fear that the audience might actually like a different kind of voice. Fear that viewers might prefer someone who speaks with clarity over someone who speaks with clout. Fear that the next generation will look at the old format and ask, wait, why was this the only option? The funniest part? The same people who swear they love competition suddenly hate it when the competition doesn't come from the usual places. So the moment gets framed as a massive gamble, a stunt, a marketing play. People start saying things like, they are just using her name, or, this is for clicks, or, this is what happens when networks don't respect the game. But watch how that logic works. When a former NBA player gets a seat, nobody screams, stunt. Even if they can't explain a single adjustment without turning it into a motivational quote. Even if their analysis is basically, he wanted it more. Even if they repeat the same 3 lines every night with different player names, it's still considered earned. But when Caitlin Clark is the one on the desk, suddenly we're strict about standards. And if you're paying attention, that tells you everything. Because this isn't really about her resume. It's about the fact that she represents something that makes the old guard uncomfortable. A new kind of basketball intelligence being taken seriously by a mainstream audience. Not whispered about. Not treated like a cute storyline. Taken seriously. And once that door cracks open, it doesn't close again. Now, here's the part that makes this whole situation feel even more intense. It wasn't some random Tuesday night game. This was one of those nights where the industry is watching the industry. Where executives aren't just looking at the scoreboard, they are watching social media. They are watching the vibe. They are watching whether the broadcast feels like a moment or just background noise. Because sports TV isn't just competing with other sports TV anymore. It's competing with everything. Clips, podcasts, YouTubers, streamers, and fan accounts that break down a play in 30 seconds and get 1 million views by sunrise. The audience doesn't just need you to show them the game, they need you to add something. They need to feel like they are seeing more than what's on the screen. That's why this was never just a guest spot. It was a statement. And statements create enemies. Before Caitlin Clark even sits down, you already have 2 sides forming. On one side, the people who want something fresh, people tired of the same safe voices saying the same safe things. On the other side are the people who feel like the door is being opened for the wrong person. The people who treat basketball knowledge like it comes with a passport stamp. Like, If you didn't do a specific thing in a specific league, your brain doesn't count. And you could practically see the reactions getting preloaded. They didn't even need a reason. They were ready to pounce the second she stumbled over a name, paused too long, or made one awkward joke. Because once you decide someone doesn't belong, you start hunting for proof. That's why this moment had pressure stacked on pressure, not the normal, nervous, on-camera pressure. The pressure of knowing millions are watching, and a loud chunk of them are hoping you fail. Not because they hate you personally, but because your success threatens their worldview. Caitlin Clark knows that world exists. She's lived in it. She's seen what happens when women's basketball gets treated like a side quest instead of the main story. She's seen people talk about her like she's a product, a trend, a headline, rather than a player who can actually change how fans think about the game. She's watched the compliments that aren't really compliments. She plays like a guy. That's the only way to describe greatness. So when she steps into the NBA broadcast space, it's not an innocent debut, it's a collision. And the reason the competitor video went viral is because it understood one thing. Viewers love a moment where the hierarchy gets shaken. They love seeing the outsider walk into a room full of legends and make everyone shift in their seat. They love when someone unexpected becomes the smartest person in the room. But here's the twist. The internet immediately tried to turn it into a superhero movie. They wanted it to be magical. They wanted dramatic sound effects. They wanted the "he's not ready" moment. They wanted jaws to drop. They wanted it to feel like the NBA's biggest secret had been pulled out of a locked drawer and held up to the camera. And when you frame it like that, you miss the real story. The real story isn't that Caitlin Clark needed to prove she's smart. The real story is that the basketball world has been acting like this kind of thinking is rare, when it's actually been around all along, just ignored or talked over. That's why this moment hit so hard. It wasn't only about what she might say on TV, it was about what her presence implies, that there are different ways to understand basketball. And some of those ways have been dismissed for years, because the people using them didn't look like the traditional experts. Now, let's talk about NBC for a second, because the network is part of the drama too. Networks don't put people on a desk for fun, especially not in a high-pressure environment. They know what comes with it. Backlash, headlines, think pieces, angry comments, and clips taken out of context. If they do it, it's because they believe the upside is worth the noise. So why would NBC want Caitlin Clark on an NBA broadcast desk? Because she's not just a basketball player, she's a cultural event. She draws in people who don't normally care about regular season NBA debates. She draws younger audiences. She draws casual fans who want a story. And she draws hardcore hoop heads who want to see if she actually understands the pro game the way they understand it. In other words, she's rare. Someone who creates curiosity from every direction. And curiosity is the most valuable thing in sports media right now. But that's also why it's dangerous. When you bring someone like that in, you force the sport to look at itself. You force commentators to level up or get exposed as performance artists. You force viewers to ask, wait, why do we accept lazy analysis from some people but demand perfection from others? And once people start asking those questions, they don't stop. That's why the critics were ready. You could almost hear them warming up the microphones. They weren't just skeptical, they were personally offended. And the funniest part? They tried to disguise it as protecting the integrity of the game. Like integrity is fragile enough to be destroyed by one woman speaking about pick-and-roll coverage. No. What they were really protecting was the feeling of ownership. For decades, NBA commentary has been an exclusive club where the biggest membership card is, "I used to play." And that's not always bad. Former players can bring unbelievable insight. But the problem is, the club started confusing "I played" with "I'm automatically the best teacher." Teaching is a different skill. Some people played at the highest level and can explain the game like a scientist breaking down a pattern. Others played at the highest level and can barely explain why a screen worked without turning it into, "He wanted it more." So when Caitlin Clark gets the MIC, she's not just a guest. She's quietly challenging the idea that the old path is the only path. And the old path does not like being challenged. That's why the pressure became suffocating. If she does great, it forces a conversation. And the establishment doesn't want a conversation like, wait, how many analysts have we been overpaying to say nothing? And if she does poorly, the establishment gets to feel right. See, that's what happens when you let the wrong people in. Either way, they thought they'd win. Which is exactly why this moment mattered. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting. While everyone treated this like a trial, Caitlin Clark didn't walk in begging to be accepted. She walked in like someone who has been underestimated her whole life and got tired of explaining herself. And when you have that kind of confidence, it changes the air in the room. Not because you're loud, but because you're steady. The loudest people in sports media rely on volume to sound important. They talk fast, they talk big, like every sentence should be a quote on a graphic. But the people who really see the game? They don't need to yell. They can just point and let the truth do the work. That's why the idea of Clark on an NBA desk scared people. If she's calm, direct, and sharp, it makes the rest of the desk look like they've been coasting. Suddenly, you're not comparing her to other guests, you're comparing her to the standard. That's when things get messy. So the night begins, and the tension is already built. You can imagine the producer in the back, reading the room like a weather report. You can imagine the camera crew catching micromoments, the quick glances, tight smiles and body language saying, "All right, let's see what happens." Because everybody knows what the audience is doing. They are not just watching the game, they are watching her. They are waiting for the first clippable moment, the first awkward pause, the first misstep, the first sign she's out of her depth. And that moment is dangerous because viewers aren't neutral, they are emotional. They are tribal. They picked a side before the broadcast started. Some wanted her to dominate the desk like a genius. Some wanted her to crash. And the broadcast became the battlefield. But the real battle wasn't about who talks best. It was about who gets to be taken seriously. Once you understand that, you see the NBA's biggest secret differently. The secret isn't a hidden file. It isn't a conspiracy. It isn't a secret meeting where owners admit something on record. The secret is simpler, and that's why it stings. Basketball understanding isn't owned by a single league. The second a mainstream audience starts believing that, the whole hierarchy starts shaking. That brings us to the next part. The broadcast stops being a segment and starts feeling like a moment NBC absolutely planned for, even if they couldn't control how big it would become. When the questions get real, when the conversation turns from hype to actual hoops, that's where you find out whether this was a stunt, or whether Caitlin Clark was about to make a lot of people regret assuming she was just there to smile for the camera. The wild part. The people most confident she'd fail were the ones with the most to lose if she didn't. But that wasn't the whole story. The next step wasn't about her presence anymore. It was about what happens when she starts breaking down the game in a way that makes the experts uncomfortable. And that's where everything shifts. Because it's one thing to sit at a desk and nod along. It's one thing to laugh at a joke, toss in a safe comment, and survive the segment. That's what a lot of critics expected. They thought this would be a polite cameo, a marketing moment, a quick ratings boost. But when the conversation starts turning toward real basketball, defensive coverage, late game adjustments, matchup hunting, that's when the tone changes. That's when you find out whether someone is a decoration or a disruption. And this is the part the internet twists into legend. Because what actually matters isn't some fantasy 12-0 run prediction or dramatic Hollywood speech. What matters is far simpler, and far more threatening. It's when she speaks with certainty. Confidence hits differently when it's quiet. When someone explains something without hedging every sentence. When they don't soften their analysis just to make the room comfortable. When they don't add a million disclaimers so nobody feels challenged. That's when you feel the shift. Here's the reality. Most fans don't notice. Television is rhythm. There's a cadence to how analysts talk. Veterans know it. They know when to pause, when to hype, and when to toss it back to the host. But when someone breaks rhythm, Not by being awkward, but by being sharper than expected. It changes the energy, because now everyone at the desk has to react in real time. If this was just the beginning, imagine what happens when she's fully comfortable in that role. The first appearance is always cautious. The real disruption comes when someone realizes they're not just surviving, they are thriving. And once that happens, the narrative flips from, "Does she belong?" to, "Who else have we been overlooking?" That's when the real revolution begins. But it gets even more uncomfortable. The next layer isn't about broadcasting. It's about what NBA culture quietly resists admitting about itself. Once the noise fades, once viral clips settle, once dramatic exaggerations cool down, you're left with a quieter, sharper question. Why did this moment feel threatening in the first place? It wasn't because a WNBA player sat at an NBA desk. It was because she didn't shrink. She didn't overcompensate. She didn't treat the moment like she was grateful just to be invited. And that challenge is deeply embedded in NBA culture. The idea that proximity to the league automatically equals intellectual authority over the sport. For decades, the NBA has positioned itself as the peak of basketball evolution. The best athletes, the best minds, and the best system. And to be fair, in terms of global reach and talent density, it sits at the top. But being the most athletic league in the world doesn't automatically mean it owns the deepest strategic imagination. That's the nerve Clark's presence presses. When she explains a rotation calmly and clearly or talks about spacing like geometry instead of chaos, she's subtly proving something. Basketball understanding isn't confined to one ecosystem. And that's where the resistance kicks in. Not publicly, not in press releases, but quietly, because the NBA machine runs on hierarchy. Rookies defer to veterans. Analysts defer to champions. Networks defer to star power. It's layered, structured, predictable. So when someone outside the traditional NBA pipeline speaks with confidence, and the audience responds positively, it disrupts that order. And disruption in sports culture is always interpreted as disrespect. If she sounds certain, some hear arrogance. If she critiques a decision, some hear an attack. If she speaks directly, some hear a challenge. That interpretation says more about the listener than the speaker. Here's the truth. The modern NBA is incredibly system-driven. Spacing is optimized. Shot charts are standardized. Three-point frequency has exploded. Offenses revolve around variations of the same core actions. High pick and roll, drive and kick, and five-out spacing. Defensively, teams switch aggressively or drop coverage depending on personnel. Brilliant. Efficient. Increasingly familiar. Now imagine someone who grew up obsessively studying patterns. Not just highlights, not just superstar moments, but movement tendencies, timing shifts, and micro-adjustments. Someone trained to see where the help defender is leaning before the ball even moves. That perspective doesn't clash with the NBA. It exposes blind spots in how we talk about it. Most televised NBA analysis doesn't go deep into micro patterns. It stays accessible, broad, and personality-driven. That leaves space for someone sharper. And when that sharper voice comes from a place the establishment historically undervalued, it forces reflection. Here's the part people don't like saying out loud. Women's basketball has often required a different type of strategic emphasis. Not because it's better, but because it had to be. Without the same vertical explosion or sheer physical dominance, the margins are tighter. Precision matters more. Timing matters more. Off-ball movement becomes critical. Defensive communication becomes survival. That environment naturally produces players who see nuance differently. So when Clark speaks about the NBA through that lens, she's not invading sacred territory, she's adding a layer. And layers reveal depth. That's why this moment didn't feel like crossover hype. It felt like cultural friction. For years, the NBA narrative machine subtly positioned the WNBA as a parallel universe. Respected but separate, admired but secondary. When someone bridges that gap seamlessly, it disrupts that mental separation. It suggests continuity. It suggests quality of understanding. That's more destabilizing than any hot take. The audience starts connecting dots. They notice why certain WNBA strategic discussions never get amplified the same way. They question whether insight correlates with league revenue. They start asking whether we've been filtering who gets labeled a genius. And when those questions circulate, institutions feel it. Not because they are villains, but because systems naturally protect existing structures. Now, let's talk about fear. Not dramatic fear, but professional fear. Coaches in the NBA operate under insane pressure. Analysts do too. One bad season, one bad narrative, one wrong call in a high-profile moment, and careers shift. Innovation is risky. Deviation is risky. Trying something new when millions are watching is risky. The league gravitates toward proven formulas. Formulas become culture. Culture becomes tradition. Tradition becomes protection. Clark's presence suggests there might be overlooked strategic imagination out there. It hints that the game could be seen differently. That brushes against the protective shell, because the implication isn't that the NBA is bad, it's that the NBA could still evolve. And evolution always threatens comfort. That's why the mythologized version blew up. Fans crave disruption. They love seeing someone shake the system without apologizing. They love the idea of a young star walking into a room full of legends and making them reconsider something. It's cinematic, but even without dramatic exaggerations, the tension remains. Clark's presence didn't expose a scandal, it exposed insecurity. Not hers, the culture's. Here's the subtle twist. She didn't have to say anything revolutionary. Just being competent, visibly competent, was enough. That's how low the bar of expectation was for some critics. They didn't expect her to command the space, they expected her to decorate it. When someone refuses to decorate and instead contributes, authority recalibrates. Zoom out further. The NBA isn't just competing against itself. It's competing for cultural relevance in a world with infinite options. If the next generation values analytical clarity and authenticity over recycled commentary, the league has to adapt. If they don't platform voices that resonate with younger fans, and slowly, without fireworks, the audience recalibrates its expectations. The conversation shifts from, "Why is she here?" to, "Why weren't more voices like this here sooner?" And once that question becomes normal, the hierarchy quietly transforms. This isn't about one broadcast desk. Young boys watching see a woman explain NBA strategy clearly and confidently. Future analysts see a blueprint that doesn't require yelling to be powerful. That's a cultural shift. Cultural shifts don't announce themselves. They settle quietly until one day the old way feels outdated. That's the real secret. Not a hidden file, not a conspiracy, just this. Basketball intelligence was never owned by a single league. And the moment mainstream audiences internalize happens if the league itself embraces that expansion instead of resisting it. That's when alliances, power plays, and long-term strategy enter the picture. Now we step into territory nobody likes to talk about publicly. Power. Once a moment like this happens, once the audience responds, once clips circulate, and once the tension is obvious, the conversation shifts from, "Can she do this?" to, "What do we do with this?" It stops being a segment, it becomes positioning. Leagues don't just think in terms of games, they think in terms of control, narrative, culture, and brand. The NBA has spent decades crafting an image. Progressive, global, stylish, and modern. It sells not just basketball but identity. When a new voice enters that ecosystem and gains traction instantly, it creates a fork in the road. Absorb it, or minimize it. Historically, powerful institutions absorb momentum. They incorporate it and position it as part of the plan all along. Caitlin Clark isn't just an analyst cameo, she's a bridge asset. She connects audiences that traditionally exist in parallel lanes. NBA fans who don't usually watch the WNBA, WNBA fans who don't usually watch studio breakdowns, younger fans who don't trust traditional media, and casual viewers who follow personalities more than teams. She sits at the intersection of all those circles. And intersections are powerful. Imagine you're in a boardroom. Ratings spike. Engagement spikes. Cross-platform traction spikes. That's not noise. That's leverage. Leverage changes negotiations. It changes how often someone is invited back, how prominently they are featured, and how much freedom they're given to speak. Here's the subtle truth about live television. Not everyone gets the same leash. Some analysts are tightly scripted and carefully steered. Others are allowed to roam. If Clark continues to demonstrate clarity and composure, that leash extends. An extended leash equals influence. Think about what that influence could mean long-term. If she becomes a regular presence in NBA media while still playing at an elite level, she becomes something the sport hasn't fully seen before. A dual force, a current player shaping the conversation in real time, not years after retirement. That's rare. Usually, commentary authority comes after playing authority fades. But when those timelines overlap, the hierarchy scrambles. Now someone influences perception while still influencing outcomes on the court, a different kind of power. And power makes people cautious, not necessarily hostile. Cautious, because the moment someone can shape both narrative and play, they become bigger than a single role. Now, the elephant in the room: gender. Whether people admit it or not, basketball culture, especially at the professional level, has long been male-dominated in both playing and analysis spaces. So when a woman steps into that traditionally male lane and does it seamlessly, it doesn't just shift basketball dialogue, it shifts cultural optics. Representation at the highest level sends signals about who is allowed to speak with authority. For decades, women in basketball media were often placed in sideline roles, hosting roles, and narrative storytelling roles, valuable and important, but not positioned as tactical authorities at the same frequency as former male players. Clark disrupts that pattern, not by demanding it loudly, but by embodying it. And embodiment is harder to dismiss. You can argue against a concept. It's harder to argue against visible competence. Now imagine young players watching this unfold. They don't see boundaries the same way older generations did. They see fluidity. They see someone crossing leagues intellectually without friction. That normalizes crossover authority. Normalization is how culture changes. The first time feels controversial, the 10th time expected, and the 100th time obvious. Clark's presence could accelerate that timeline. Here's the twist that makes it strategic. The NBA benefits from that normalization. It wants to appear inclusive, progressive, and aligned with the next generation's values. So instead of resisting someone like Clark, the smarter move is partnership. Partnerships reshape ecosystems. Imagine a future where collaboration between NBA and WNBA analysis is routine, where insights flow both ways, and where strategic innovation isn't siloed by league branding. That doesn't weaken the NBA, it strengthens the overall basketball ecosystem. But there's a catch. To embrace that future, the league has to let go of a subtle superiority complex. It has to acknowledge that elite thinking doesn't only emerge from its pipeline. Institutions rarely surrender superiority easily. That's why this moment matters. It's not explosive, it's evolutionary. Evolution is harder to stop than revolution, because it doesn't look like an attack. It looks like progress. Take it further. If Clark sharpens her media presence, she doesn't just become a bridge between leagues, she becomes a bridge between eras. Older fans respect skill and preparation. Younger fans respect authenticity and intelligence. If she balances both, she occupies a rare space. Rare spaces command attention. That's when endorsement deals evolve, media roles expand, and influence multiplies beyond the hardwood. Once influence multiplies, so does voice. A powerful voice in the sport can advocate for structural change subtly. Equal resources, equal amplification, and equal analytical respect. And if that advocacy feels organic rather than confrontational, it's hard to oppose, because opposing it starts looking regressive. And no modern league wants to look regressive. Now zoom back to the emotional core. Why did fans react so strongly? People love watching ceilings shatter quietly, not with anger, but with competence. It's satisfying. It's validating. It feels like justice. And when something feels like justice, it builds loyalty. Clark's biggest asset isn't hype, it's credibility. If she keeps stacking credible moments on the court and off, she becomes untouchable in conversation. Untouchable voices don't ask for space, they create it. That's when the power dynamic flips. Instead of asking, will the NBA allow this? The question becomes, can the NBA afford not to? Audiences decide faster than boardrooms. If fans embrace crossover intelligence, the league adapts. It always has. Hand-checking disappeared when the game evolved. Post-centric offenses faded when spacing took over. Mid-range dominance gave way to three-point volume. Culture adapts to efficiency. Right now, analytical clarity is efficient. It travels well, clips well, and teaches well. And teaching builds deeper fandom than yelling ever could. Imagine this trajectory 5 years from now. Clark is still playing at a high level. She's a regular analytical presence. Younger analysts follow her blueprint. The audience expects smarter breakdowns. WNBA strategy is discussed on NBA panels without novelty framing. That world doesn't feel radical, it feels natural. But it starts with moments like this. Someone stepping into a space, performing steadily, and forcing everyone to recalibrate expectations. That's the quiet revolution. Not fireworks, but recalibration. Once it happens, it's permanent. The biggest secret wasn't a hidden formula, it was this. The boundaries between leagues were always more cultural than intellectual. The second someone crosses them smoothly, the illusion dissolves. When illusions dissolve, ecosystems expand. The only question left: how far will that expansion go? The next phase isn't just about Clark proving herself. It's about whether the basketball world leans into that expansion or tries to slow it. And if history tells us anything about momentum, slowing it rarely works. This is where the story stops being about one person and starts being about the future of the entire ecosystem. Momentum doesn't ask permission. Once an audience tastes something sharper, something precise, something that makes them feel like they're seeing the game in higher resolution, they don't easily go back to low resolution. For years, sports broadcasting leaned on personality. Big reactions, big arguments, and big statements. It works. It drives engagement. It fuels debate clips and social media battles. But there's a ceiling. Viewers crave substance, not lectures or complexity for its own sake, clarity. And clarity is disruptive in a spectacle-driven environment. That's why this moment with Caitlin Clark felt bigger than it technically was. It hinted at a pivot point, a possible evolution. If networks realize audiences respond strongly to precise, confident breakdowns, especially from unexpected voices, they'll chase that formula. Once multiple networks chase it, it stops being an experiment. It becomes the new normal. Now, think about the ripple effect inside locker rooms. Players watch broadcasts too. They hear what analysts say. They notice who actually understands the game versus who's filling airtime. If players begin respecting crossover analysts who genuinely break down actions with depth, that respect travels. It changes who gets invited to training camps as consultants. It changes who gets asked to speak at clinics. It changes whose voice carries weight behind closed doors. And that's where real power lives. Not in viral clips, but in quiet influence. The NBA has always been a copycat league strategically. When one team finds an edge, others replicate it. When one concept works, it spreads. The same applies to media influence. If one crossover analyst earns widespread respect, others will follow. Doors open a little wider. The hierarchy doesn't explode, it stretches. Stretching is how systems survive disruption. But stretching also permanently alters shape. Here's something even more interesting. Caitlin Clark isn't entering this conversation from a neutral position. She already commands massive attention as a player. She doesn't need validation from analysts to maintain relevance. She generates her own gravity, and gravity attracts opportunity. The NBA understands star power better than anyone. It built its global dominance on it. Magic and Bird, Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, Steph. Each era is anchored by personalities who shaped culture beyond the court. Clark has that type of cultural gravity in women's basketball. If she leveraged it across leagues, she becomes a unifying figure the sport hasn't fully seen before. Unity across gender lines and audience segments is commercially powerful. Long-term, that means the league can't afford to treat moments like this as novelty. Because novelty fades, integration endures. Consistently elevating voices like Clark's future-proofs the league. It aligns with evolving audience expectations. Resist integration, and the league risks looking stuck. And stuck is dangerous in a digital era where fans can build alternative ecosystems overnight. YouTube analysts, independent podcasters, and film breakdown creators, they already exist. They already command millions of views. The monopoly on basketball explanation is gone. The NBA has two choices: elevate diverse, credible voices within its ecosystem, or watch those voices thrive independently, siphoning attention away. That's the strategic crossroads hidden beneath this story. Now let's talk about ego. Because ego is the silent player in every professional arena. Coaches have ego. Players have ego. Analysts have ego. Executives have ego. Ego protects territory. When someone new enters territory traditionally guarded by veterans, ego reacts. Not always publicly, but internally. It asks, why her? Why now? What makes her different? The honest answer is uncomfortable. She represents evolution without waiting her turn. That unsettles traditional structures, because sports culture has long valued seniority. You earn your stripes. You climb the ladder. It's that shift. It's not disrespecting veterans. It's redefining what qualifies as authority. Redefining authority reshapes industries. Imagine 10 years from now, a young analyst emerges, maybe someone who played overseas, maybe someone who never played professionally but studied obsessively. They command attention because they communicate brilliantly. The audience won't automatically dismiss them. The precedent has been set. That's the power of visible crossover success. It lowers resistance for the next person, and the next, and the next. Culture shifts permanently, not with a single explosion, but through repeated normalization. Return to the emotional core. Why did fans frame this moment as exposing a secret? Because it feels good to believe something hidden has been revealed. Cinematic. Dramatic. But the real exposure wasn't secret data or conspiracies. It was assumptions. The assumption that elite basketball thinking must come from a narrow pipeline, that authority must look a certain way, and that crossover voices are novelty, not substance. When those assumptions crack, people experience it as a revelation. Revelation spreads fast online, but its long-term effect is quieter: expectation. Once viewers see someone cross leagues intellectually and perform with confidence, they start expecting that level of clarity everywhere. Expectations drive evolution faster than controversy ever could. Caitlin Clark doesn't need controversy to maintain relevance. She just needs consistency. Consistency compounds credibility. Credibility compounds influence. Influence compounds power. Power, used strategically, reshapes landscapes. If she continues building in both lanes, playing and analyzing, she becomes incredibly rare. A living bridge between competition and commentary, between performance and perspective, and between the present and the future. Bridges don't just connect, they redefine distance. What once felt far apart suddenly feels adjacent. NBA and WNBA discussions blend naturally. Strategic conversations become less siloed. Audience segments overlap more comfortably. That's the subtle revolution unfolding. Revolutions built on competence are hardest to stop because there's nothing to attack. No scandal, no controversy, just visible capability. And visible capability forces adaptation. The biggest secret wasn't hidden truths about the NBA. It was this: the sport is evolving beyond old boundaries. The only thing holding those boundaries in place was habit. Habit feels like tradition. Tradition feels like law. Once habit breaks, tradition adjusts, and law becomes suggestion. The moment Caitlin Clark stepped confidently into an NBA broadcast space, one habit cracked. the idea that analytical authority must come from one lane. Once a crack forms, light gets in. The question isn't whether she belongs, that's already outdated. The real question is how far this expansion goes. If this was just the beginning, the next phase won't be about a single desk appearance. It will be about redefining who gets to shape the future of basketball conversation entirely. And that future is closer than most people realize.